Hi, everybody. Hi, Amanda and Brittany. Hope you're there. Hello. Awesome. So we are gonna get started today, right at 1 o'clock Eastern Time with our webinar titled Contracting Solutions for Public Sector Entities to Increase Local Food Purchasing. And my name is Lalani Nelson. I'm going to be hosting the webinar today. And I just want to mention a few quick housekeeping items before we dive into it. So all of the attendees are going to be muted. We're going to record this and it will be shared on our website afterwards, as well as through, I think, the email that goes out afterwards. And if you have any questions during the webinar, we're encouraging folks to use the Q&A feature for like a real question that you're looking for an answer to, but you can utilize the chat to share resources or anything else that comes to mind during our presentation. And then we're going to monitor the chat and try to respond to as many questions as we can during it and answer some of them at the end during the Q&A time. All right, so here is our agenda for today. I'm going to first welcome you all and introduce our speakers. Then I'm going to give an overview of local food procurement policy to set the stage for the rest of the presentation. And then after that, we're going to hear from Brittany about what's happening in Maine. And lastly, Amanda Carls is going to walk us through a new guide for state and public sector entities that contract with food distributors and are looking to increase their local food procurement. And I will say this now, and I think Amanda's going to say it later, but the information shared during this presentation is not intended as a substitute for legal advice and is not intended to advocate for any specific legislative or other policy approach in any given state or locality. And then one last thing, we are going to be using a few of those polls during the presentation to learn a little bit about the folks that are on this webinar today. So stay tuned for that and try to take the poll if you can. And I'm now going to introduce myself. Again, I'm Lalani Nelson. I'm the Deputy Director and Senior Researcher at the Center for Agriculture and Food Systems, which is based at Vermont Law and Graduate School. And in my role, I strategically manage and direct operations and programming, as well as lead and contribute to projects, including the Healthy Food Policy Project, our Farm to School State Policy Handbook, the Farmers Market Legal Toolkit, among others. And I have a dual master's degree in agroecology and urban and regional planning from UW-Madison. It sounds like there's audio feedback. Somebody is saying in the chat. Amanda and Brittany, are you hearing any of that before I
I'm
keep going?
not, but yeah, I'm curious if other people are.
Okay, let us know if everybody's having an issue with the audio and I will try to troubleshoot that and figure that out. All right, so Amanda is a CAFS research affiliate, and she's an adjunct professor of law, food law and policy, and the principal of Foodvocate LLC, where she partners with nonprofits, government agencies, and research institutions to identify opportunities and tackle challenges in food systems and public policy. Drawing on her background in law and public health, Amanda helps organizations navigate statutory and regulatory frameworks and contracting landscapes and develops resources such as guidance reports, model policy language, and practical toolkits. And her work spans food procurement, healthy food retail, urban ag, tax incentives, nutrition programs, among others. And then Brittany is the Local Foods Procurement Planning and Research Associate at the Maine Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry, where she works to increase the amount of local food that state institutions are purchasing and identifies challenges and opportunities in the farm to institution landscape. And she has a master's degree in food policy and applied nutrition from the Friedman School at Tufts, and previously worked as the program manager at the Mass Food Systems Collaborative, which is a statewide food policy nonprofit. All right, and it looks like the audio is okay for other people, so I'm glad that everybody is good to go here. All right, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about where I work, the Center for Agriculture and Food Systems. We are a research-based center that's housed at Vermont Law and Graduate School, and with our students, we produce original scholarly research in the field of food law and policy, food and ag law and policy, and we serve the broadest range of stakeholders in the food system and work with local, regional, national, and international partners to address food systems challenges that are related to food and nutrition security, food affordability, farmland access, workforce, farm viability, local economies, and public health, among others. And we work really closely with our partners to provide legal services and develop resources that respond to those needs that our partners have. We also have a food and ag clinic and research assistant program, and our students work directly on projects alongside our partners in engaging in this work that spans the food system. And I will say that our research on institutional food procurement policy, including this resource that we're highlighting today, as well as our State Farm to School Policy Handbook, is funded by the USDA National Agricultural Library. So thank you to our funders. All right. And I'm just showing you a list of projects that CAFS has in case you're interested in any of these other topics. Today, I will be focusing on the work that has been completed as part of our Healthy Food Policy Project that also is connected to our work in the Institutional Food Procurement Policy Project. But if you want to learn about any of these, you can visit our brand new website. And our website also has a resource library. And in this resource library, it has issue briefs, case studies, reports, guides, more than what you could kind of guess from the the project list that I shared before. So check it out and see if you can find something that is helpful to you. Here is how you can get to our website. It's cafs.vermontlaw.edu. And thank you to Austin for sharing links in the chat during this presentation. All right. So local food procurement policy. We have received at CAV specific requests that are related to local and also values-based food procurement policy support through this process that we are calling our Local and Regional Food Systems Policy Technical Assistance Lab, where you complete an intake form and then we try to provide support and information and resources to groups across the country. And so we have been hearing from a lot of communities that there is a need for more information on local food policy, procurement policy in particular. And a lot of people want to know where their food comes from, and they want to support local farmers and also care about other values, such as animal welfare, environmental impact, workers' rights, providing access to cultural foods. So all of that values-based procurement. And it's clear to us that food procurement and values-based procurement is an area of growing interest, and there's need for legal and policy support in this area. And so these are some trends that we're seeing in areas that we've done more research on. So this is not all of the things related to local food procurement policy, but I'll go through some of them. So farm to school state policy is definitely growing. We have done research with the National Farm to School Network on this, and you can check out the State Farm to School Policy Handbook, which shows a tremendous growth in farm to school policies, including 43 states that have introduced almost 300 bills just from 2021 to 2023. And so far in 2025, there's already over 100 farm to school bills introduced from 30 states. So we're seeing a lot of momentum there, but also connected to universal school meals and bills that are focused on expanding school meals access generally. And also, aside from these trends, the federal government just opened up the farm to school grants again, if you didn't know, and we'll put a link in the chat. So that's great news for the farm to school community. We're also seeing a lot of policies in the farm to school realm that we've been researching, but that go beyond to other community nutrition programs that are local food purchasing incentives. And a lot of states are providing funding through their own state budgets. And Vermont's even, just one example, is stepping up to provide funding amid federal funding cuts to support their farm to school local food incentive grant program. And these incentive programs are having a really big impact, and they're clearly working. Also, over 15 cities and counties have adopted what are called good food purchasing policies. And those use values-based standards. The most recent version is the 3.0, and you can find all of this on the Center for Good Food Purchasing's website. And those values include, in addition to local food, they include equity, accountability, and transparency, environmental sustainability, a valued workforce, animal welfare, and community health and nutrition. And what's important about these that kind of relates to something I'll say in a little bit is that you pass one of these policies and it's great. And once it's in place, that's where the real work has to begin. And it often starts with a baseline assessment of what the current food purchases look like, and then sets goals and an action plan and tracking to track the progress and make sure you're meeting those goals. And we have a great case study that is about how Boston has been implementing their good food purchasing policy that I encourage you to check out if you want to learn more about what that looks like. Okay, so we're also seeing an interest in movement toward changing policy to improve the quality of food in carceral settings, which is including some folks are focusing on local food in carceral settings. And CAPS has written a report with Farm to Institution New England on this topic, focused on New England, but is doing research beyond that currently. And we'll share that report in the chat. Another one, food is medicine, which is an approach that uses food-based interventions that try to prevent and manage chronic illness. That's a growing approach, and a lot of people working in this area are pushing for policy change, some of which intersects with farm to institution models. And Harvard's Food Law and Policy Clinic just put out a report that has a lot of information on this, so you should look to that if you want to learn more. And then states are passing and have been for a while passing local preference laws that require state agencies to give preference to food that's manufactured or produced in the state. And some are also creating purchasing goals or purchasing targets, which we'll get into more in just a bit. And there's a great report, a little old, almost 5 years old now, that we wrote with Farm to Institution New England, which is called Regional Trends in New England Farm to Institution Procurement Policy, which kind of gives you a scan of what was going on in New England at the time. And I bet we'll update that at some point. We also have seen federal rules supporting local food procurement change over time. And it went into effect in July 2024. The USDA made some changes called geographic preference expansion, and that just provides more flexibility for schools and institutions to give preference or favor local food products under federal child nutrition rules. All right, that was a lot. I'm going to pause and do a quick poll, and we're going to see how this works. So I hope you can see this. Thumbs up, Brittany and Amanda, if you can see it. Okay, cool. So can you please answer, what role do you play in local food purchasing? The answers are buyer, producer, distributor, support organization, state or municipal government, researcher, and other. All right. And can you guys see the results, Brittany and Amanda? No? Okay. So I'm going to wait until people are still taking it. So once it kind of levels off, I'm going to end the poll so you all can see. This is very interesting. Not a lot of producers. I guess that's not too surprising. All right, I'm going to end the poll so you can see where this is at. So we have a lot of support organizations on the call and state and municipal government, which was a target audience, so that's great. Yeah, it's a good spread. It's a good mix. I'm not surprised producers are not the number one because it's a very busy time for farmers, and yeah, it would be a lot to get them on here. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to try to get back to where I was. All right, so here we go. Can you see my next slide? State level local food purchasing targets. Great. All right. So state level local food purchasing targets or goals, they're just one way that a state can try to increase the amount of local food purchased by public entities. And states that want to do this, they can pass a law that establishes a purchasing target for food produced in the state or I guess region they could do. And these are sometimes also referred to as benchmark laws. In a few places, I've seen that term used. The purchasing goals or targets can be either aspirational goals or specific mandatory quotas that are set through the legislative process or by executive order. And for example, an Illinois law established a goal for 20% of all food and food products purchased by state agencies and state-owned facilities to be local farmer food products by 2020. And then they paired that with a price preference for bidders who fulfill contracts with the state using local farm and food products. And these laws typically apply to food served in public institutions such as schools, government-run hospitals, carceral facilities, or food purchases for other publicly operated or funded settings. And the economic impact of the purchasing targets can be pretty substantial, and they can result in benefits beyond the institutions that purchase and serve the food. I'll tell you to check out a list of 14 state policies that we have that establish targets. It's in the appendix of the resource that we are focusing on today. So if you want to see just a list of what these specific laws are and what states have them, you can go to the appendix of the resource. For right now, we're going to do a second poll since that first one actually worked pretty well. I'm going to go back. This one is about local food purchasing goals. So does your state, city, or institution have a goal around purchasing local food? Yes, no, working on it, or not sure? Okay, this is great. Um, Thank you all for taking these polls. I can tell that people are engaged with this presentation, so I appreciate that. I'm going to end it because I think we got as many people as we're going to get. All right, so this is great. There are 50% of the people said yes, that their state, city, or institution has a goal around purchasing local food. That's really awesome. And for those of you that are not sure, maybe this will give you some more information to help you learn whether they do or not where you are, and you can try to push for that to happen. All right, so I'm gonna get back. I have one more slide. All right. So, why do contracting strategies matter? I know that's what we're actually talking about today. Why was I talking about these other things? So, how are states supposed to actually meet these goals that they're setting to increase local food purchases? Say that a state sets a goal for 20% by 2050. How are the actual different public sector entities and how are the people who are purchasing food supposed to meet those goals? And that's why it's really important to look at implementation of policies like where it's actually happening and the rubber hits the road. Because it's usually not as easy as it seems on paper. And this is exactly where contracting strategies come into play and why Amanda is going to like dig down deep into this resource that we put together. So in order to meet those targets or goals, the people that are doing the food purchasing have to change their food sourcing to buy more locally grown food and create new systems that allow for tracking and reporting of those purchases to show that the 20% in this hypothetical example was locally grown. So procurement officials and purchasing staff face a lot of challenges around this. It's not easy. And those challenges include cost constraints, logistical distribution challenges, seasonal variability of the produce, misalignment of the supplier procurement practices with what the institutional needs are, enforcement, among others. And so changes to the contracts have the potential to greatly increase local food purchases and make it easier to be able to then report on the progress. And RFPs can specify a minimum percentage of food to be locally sourced and require source reporting. Also, vendor selection can be better aligned with the local food purchasing targets to make that easier. And then lastly, flexible contract terms like off-contract purchase allowances can increase options. And Amanda's going to dig way more deep into this. I'm just putting it out there to get you all aware of what's coming. And I wanted to draw the connection between local food procurement policies at the state level and then contracting strategies so that you understand why this resource is really important. And now I'm going to hand it off to Brittany so she can share more about what she's been working on in Maine. So Brittany, you can take it from here. I think you're muted, Brittany, or I can't hear you yet.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Ilani, and thanks for everyone for being here. I'm glad to see that there's so much excitement about something that can seem a little dry. But I'm going to talk about our experience in Maine. Do you want to go to the next slide? Perfect. So Maine, as Leilani had mentioned, many places do have local goals, and one of those places is Maine. So we have a law in the books that says that the commissioner will establish a program to make sure that by this year, 20% of the food that's procured by state institutions is from Maine. And in this case, state institutions include correctional facilities, state-run hospitals, and community colleges. And then I'm going to be talking about three main agencies as I go through this kind of case study or story about what this looks like in Maine. And I may use acronyms, but hopefully it won't be too confusing. So there's the Department of Corrections, or the DOC, which operates the correctional facilities or prisons. The Department of Financial and Administrative Services, or DAFS, which writes the RFQs and the contracts. And then the Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry, which supports local procurement. And again, that's where I'm based. And my position actually came out of the same legislation that created the procurement program that's listed at the top there. Next slide. Wonderful. And so to outline kind of what the contract situation is in Maine, there are 15 state-funded institutions and kind of other institutions that are all grouped together. And then there are 3 contracts. So that's a food contract, a dairy contract, and a bakery contract. And just to be clear, when I talk about farmed institution, my role is in working with state-funded institutions, and the Department of Education actually works with farmed institutions around K through 12 schools. So that's a separate department and not part of this contracting discussion. So the 15 state-funded institutions include, as we mentioned, the carceral facilities, the hospitals, and then also included in that are the veterans' homes, county jails, and 1 senior home. Next. So the process for creating these 3 contracts starts with the Department of Financial and Administrative Services, and they write the request for quotes, or the RFQ. Then food distributors that are interested in selling to institutions submit bids. DAF selects the winning bid, and then they write the contract. The food distributor signs it, and then the institutions order food, and the food distributor delivers it. And those contracts can last for 1 year up to 5 years, typically. Next. So I'm going to talk in particular about the Department of Corrections because I think it's a great example of what's happening in Maine. The DOC, because in part because they have some wonderful people on staff, have been leading a great program where they're able to serve pretty high quality food to the residents, and they're able to do that. Excuse me, because they source local food directly from food producers. They grow a lot of food themselves at the farms that are located at every facility, and they also do a lot of scratch cooking. So I'll go into a little bit more detail about those kind of 3 components because they'll be relevant in our discussion in a moment. So sourcing local food, you can see in the little map that's pulled out of a report in the middle there. So that's the outline of Maine, and there are some farms highlighted. And that's just to kind of show that the DOC is working directly with many farms and food producers to get food that's nutritious and relatively low cost and local. So for example, they're working with Pineland Farms Dairy, which makes cheese. And when they go to cut the blocks of cheese that they're then going to sell in grocery stores, there are some strange looking pieces. So they will sell those pieces to the DOC at a pretty low cost. Then Maine Grains is a local grain producer, and they when they switch from milling one type of grain to another type of grain, they'll have their run of the mill, which is a bit of a mix of both types of grain, so hard to sell to a regular consumer. But because the DOC has a great bakery program, they're able to take that and make that into bread. And then another one would be the mushroom farm. When they have a glut of mushrooms, they'll sell them at low cost to the facility. As I mentioned, they also have farms, and some of them are quite extensive, very productive farms, and they're able to use that produce kind of throughout the year. And then they're from scratch cooking, so both residents get to learn about the skills that they need to work in a commercial kitchen, which they then can use later in life. And then also everybody benefits by having more kind of homemade from scratch food, and it's also often lower cost. So they're able to spend more of their money on kind of the higher quality local foods. So as you can see, this has garnered attention from the New York Times and the Portland Press Herald. There's a Seeds of Change documentary that follows some of the residents who have been part of the kitchen program. And then Impact Justice, which is a national organization, wrote a report on food in prisons and highlighted Maine for many of these things. And I mention this because, next slide. About a year ago, there was confusion about how the contracts impacted this kind of local procurement process that we've been using. So people were concerned about whether the DOC facilities could purchase off contract. Leilani mentioned that sometimes that's a provision in some of the contracts that, yes, you're going to purchase the bulk of your food from one particular vendor, but maybe there's a certain percentage that you could purchase from different purveyors. And if so, what's that percentage and at what price? Sometimes it says, it has to be below the price that the prime vendor is offering it at. And then what would happen to the relationships that the DOC had developed with these local farms and food producers if they could no longer purchase from them? They'd been really steady customers, and maybe they were getting the message that they would have to stop them. So what would that do to the local farms around them? And do these contracts then align with the state goals around food procurement? As I mentioned at the top, the state has a goal that there will be 20% local food purchased. So do those contracts really support that? So since some of this confusion has come to light, the leadership of the three departments that are kind of relevant here, the Department of Corrections and Department of Agriculture, as well as the Department of Administrative and Financial Services, have met. And now there's a process by which DOC can purchase from local food vendors, which is great. And we also filled out one of those intake forms that Leilani mentioned. And so we've been able to work with Vermont Law School about how to improve contract language, which has been amazing. And so our hopes for the future is that these state goals around the 20% local food will be included in future RFQs and contracts, that the three state agencies I mentioned will collaborate, and that local food producers will also be at the table with that collaboration. And then currently legislators are working to pass a bill to strengthen the local food procurement goals, so to increase those above 20%, and then also strengthen the state contract language. And this is where this resource that we reached out to the Vermont Law School about has far exceeded our expectations. And I think that it will be incredibly useful for us to have this 30+ page document as reference as we go forward to try to improve the contract situation in May, to allow us to really purchase more local food. Thanks. And I think I'm going to turn it over to a survey and then to Amanda.
That's right. We're going to do yet another fun poll. This one is about barriers that you may be facing or that you know of others facing in your state or where you live. So the question is, which of these barriers to increasing local food purchasing exists in the institution you work in or with? And you can select all that apply. You don't have to just pick the top one. So yeah, I see people are taking this poll and I appreciate you doing that. And numbers are still coming in. So I will no spoilers this time. I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to just wait maybe 5 more seconds here. All right, I think we got everybody that's going to be taking it. I don't mean to cut anybody off, but we're going to end the poll and share the results. All right, so as you can see, budget constraints. Yep, and staff capacity related also to budget constraints, I'm sure. There are some contracting challenges, which great. You can learn from what Amanda's about to talk about. Maybe that will help. And yeah, really a spread here. And if anybody is willing to share if you answered other in this poll, if you're willing to share in the chat what other challenges or barriers that you're facing, we'd love to learn about those too. All right. Other equals distributor grower supplies unable to meet the regulatory requirements. Hey, McKenna, thank you. Should have added that to the poll. Yes. Leadership buy-in. Yep. All right. Awesome. And just keep putting stuff in the chat if it comes to mind, because we're trying to learn from you all too during this process and presentation. And now I'm going to hand it over to Amanda. It's your turn. Go ahead. I'm going to change the slides too. Here we go.
There we go. Well, hi, everyone. Today I'm going to walk you through a resource from the Center for Agriculture and Food Systems that I had the privilege of working on as a researcher and author in collaboration with a team of other contributors and editors, including Leilani Nelson and Brittany Peets, who you've just heard from. We created the guide because a lot of state and even some local governments have stated goals, sometimes enshrined in executive orders or statutes, as Leilani and Brittany had both mentioned, for buying more local food for places like public schools, hospitals, and prisons. But we were learning through conversations with people like Brittany that actually hitting those targets can be tricky, in part because of the procurement process and challenges within that process. And that's reflected. It looked like that was one of your kind of top three areas of challenge in that last slide poll. So this is sort of tracking. We won't be able to sort of solve all the problems, but we'll at least be able to address a little bit in terms of things that are related to those procurement processes, and including especially the contracting phase. So this resource is designed to help by giving public sector procurement teams practical tips and strategies for adjusting their procurement processes and contracts with food distributors so they can make those local sourcing goals a reality. Over the next few minutes, we're going to explore parts of the resource so that you have a better sense of how you might use it in your work. And I'll highlight just a few of the tips and strategies that are included in the resource. Next slide. So as Leilani mentioned at the outset, for those of you who might have tuned in later, I'll just repeat it here again. I want to quickly note that while the resource provides background legal information, it's not legal advice, and it's not intended to be a substitute for legal advice. Likewise, it's not intended to advocate for any specific legislative or other policy approach in any given state or locality. And along those lines, nothing that you're going to hear from me today or that you will have heard from either Brittany or Leilani is going to be legal advice. And this is really, really important because every contracting scenario and setting is going to be unique. So it's really important that you are all working with your legal counsel to make sure you understand it, the nuances where you're sitting. Next slide. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's get back to what the resource does do. To explore some of the ways that public sector entities, or you'll see sometimes we'll refer to them here on these slides as PSE, as kind of as shorthand, might optimize their contracting processes with food distributors to increase local food procurement. This resource does the following. It contextualizes how food distributor contracts fit within the landscape of other supplier options. It outlines how public sector entities can prepare for the bid solicitation process. It highlights approaches for solicitation, bid selection, and contract drafting to align with local food procurement targets. And it provides guidance on options for monitoring and assessment requirements that can be included in the contract terms. Next slide. Some other things that are included, there's a hypothetical contract review scenario that demonstrates how, again, with the support of legal counsel, procurement teams might explore flexibilities and limitations in food distributor contracts. There's also sample and draft solicitation contracting language and documents that emphasize local food sourcing. And there's a list of other resources such as guides, toolkits, and reports that provide more information for procurement teams focused on local food procurement. Next slide. So again, this guide focuses on public sector contracts with food distributors, especially in cases where there has been a practice of the public sector entity working with just one or a small number of distributors. Understanding this focus is important because while there is guidance in the report that can probably be applied generally across other types of contracting scenarios, obstacles to local food procurement within the supplier bidding and contracting processes really do vary depending on the contract type. We thought it was important to make that distinction and to take on that emphasis in this resource for a few different reasons. One of them is that through our research in developing this guide, we learned that there was already quite a bit of guidance on contracting with food service management companies, or as you'll see here on the screen, sometimes we use the acronym FSMC, as is pretty standard in the field to refer to those groups. Two, contracting with food service management companies can add additional challenges and complications to the contracting process that we wanted to tease out from the broadline food distributor context. And three, and this is important, we were learning that in some scenarios, contracting guidance for working with food service management contracts might be being unnecessarily applied to food distributor contracts in ways that might overly complicate those scenarios. Next slide. So I'm going to pause briefly here and just do another check-in question, more audience participation. So this question here, and I think Leilani's got another poll for us that we can, you all can click into. So have you tried adapting your contracts specifically to encourage local sourcing? Now let Leilani tell us when
We're getting there.
yeah, when
People are
we're
taking
ready.
the poll. Thank you all. I'm going to give it maybe like 15 more seconds based on how long it took for the other results to come through. This is very interesting and kind of similar to the last time. If you answered, I mean, if you answered any of these, yes, no, or currently exploring, feel free to share in the chat anything interesting. But those that are currently exploring, I'm curious what you're exploring. I'm going to end the poll and share the results. Can you see?
Wow.
Yeah. So there's a lot
Wow.
of 43% of those of you that answered this poll have tried adapting the contract specifically to encourage local sourcing. So that's awesome. We'd love to hear how that all went. I'm going to stop sharing so Amanda can get back to her talk.
Great. All right, next slide. All right, so as you've already heard, there's been some jargon that I've been throwing around. Leilani's throwing around some, and so is Brittany. But for that reason, we've included in this resource that I'm talking about right now a glossary to help tease out some of the terms. The next slide. I'm not going to cover the entire glossary here. That would be boring to read through a bunch of definitions that we've created. But I just wanted to kind of cover or at least paraphrase a couple of the key terms that we have included in that glossary because they'll help contextualize some of the rest of this presentation here. So the first term relates to contracts with the food service management company, where the food service management company takes on both food service and food procurement functions. So we're calling this a comprehensive food service management contract. And the second term, which we're calling broadline food distributor contract, and thinking about specifically kind of these exclusive or near exclusive contracting scenarios, these relate to contracts with food distributors who supply food products, but do not take on any of the logistics of preparing and serving food. So those functions might be kept in-house or maybe contracted out with another vendor. Next slide, please. Actually, you can go back to the last slide. Sorry. There we go. So a lot of entities might find themselves in the first type of contracting scenario. And in those cases, they might be limited to selecting or specifying foods from a portfolio of suppliers or products set by the food service management company. But again, in this resource, we're really focusing on these food distributor contracts, so more along the lines of this second term here, especially in those scenarios where the public sector entity finds itself working primarily with one or maybe a small collection of food distributors, or maybe wants to switch to that type of model or considering it. Okay, next slide. So to help provide an example of how the resource is useful for navigating food distributor contracts in particular, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here and talk about the section of the resource that covers vendor selection and contract drafting. In that section, we include considerations for drafting food distributor contracts to ensure maximum flexibility. So we discuss, among other things, the use of so-called off-contract clauses as an area where there is important nuance to consider. And that's already been touched on a little bit previously here. Unlike in common comprehensive food service management contract scenarios where food choices might be set by the food service management company, public sector entities may actually have more options to purchase outside of their primary distributor's catalog of options. This is because contracts with food distributors don't always have the same standard exclusivity clauses and similar types of clauses such as minimum quantity requirements. And in some cases, they can be negotiated out even where the distributor would like to include them. So whereas adding an off-contract clause to a standard food service management contract might provide flexibility, more flexibility than there would otherwise be. adding it to an otherwise already sort of flexible distributor contract might unnecessarily actually imply an exclusive relationship where one was not already indicated or desired, or at least might just create some ambiguity in the contract. So in the resource, we highlight, for example, how contract design combined with legal guidance, again, working with your legal counsel, can help public sector entities navigate around pitfalls like this to maximize purchasing flexibility in contracts with food distributors without creating unintended limitations. All right, next slide. So in addition to some of these technical contracting term considerations, much of the resource we are previewing today also focuses on how public sector entities can prepare for the bid solicitation process, which of course happens before you even get to the contract drafting stage. I've already touched on aspects of the contracting landscape, but the guide goes into greater detail on exploring the nuances of different contract types and their features. These next two bullets, review current contracts and consider vendor options, represent sections of the resource that kind of go hand in hand. In those sections, we walk you through guidance for how to understand features in your existing contracts and how to take stock of what your options may be for working with other types of vendors, whether those be distributors, individual local producers, maybe local farm cooperatives, food hubs, or other types of vendors. The last part of the section on preparing for bid solicitation, which touches on communities of practice, highlights opportunities for collaboration and working with other similarly situated teams, maybe in other parts of the country, to identify best practices, new approaches, and to come together for brainstorming. Next slide. So another key area of the resource that I'd like to highlight, and there's a lot in there, is the portion of the resource that gets into ways to work with legal counsel to understand the legal landscape. So you're not going to be contracting or issuing bid solicitation documents in a vacuum. So understanding the legal landscape where you're sitting is really important. So I'm going to just take a little bit of time to touch on that at least a little bit now. But again, I want to encourage you to actually go to this resource to learn more. So as Brittany discussed and Leilani also mentioned, there are states like Maine that have local food purchasing policies that set local food purchasing targets, either as a goal or even sometimes as a required quota. And we have lots of examples of various states that are doing this in the resource. And in that resource, this one that we're discussing today, we provide guidance on how public sector procurement teams can align their vendor selection and contracting processes to better meet those targets. But importantly, those types of target setting laws and orders are not the only policies that can influence the process. So briefly here, I'm going to cover a few other legal landscape considerations that, again, we dig into more deeply in the resource. So next slide. So first, state and sometimes local procurement laws determine how bids can be evaluated. In some cases, governments might require what's sometimes referred to as a lowest responsible bidder approach, but that's not the only possible approach. Other approaches may include, for example, lowest responsive bid or best value bid. Depending on how these approaches are legally interpreted in each jurisdiction, the areas where public sector entities might have discretion to weigh experience, technical capabilities, or other specific project needs and goals, like local sourcing, alongside cost, are sort of set. Next slide, please. So which of these or other types of approaches applies? Again, it varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. And in some cases, more than one selection method might be permissible. On top of that, the details for how to apply these parameters are not always spelled out in the laws themselves. So for that reason, it's really important that public sector entities work with legal counsel to confirm which approaches are allowed or even required under their laws, and importantly, to consider how they are interpreted or likely to be interpreted by a court should there ever be any sort of litigation, to understand what sorts of local food sourcing and other capabilities they can prioritize in choosing a vendor. So really what this comes down to is really eliminating the guesswork by getting the guidance up front. Next slide. So in addition to local purchasing targets and general bid selection approaches, like I just was talking about in that last slide, some laws, orders, or other policies may allow or even mandate a bid preference for in-state or other geographically sourced products. These laws might work in different ways. A couple of common examples include these so-called tiebreaker preferences, such as giving a vendor with an kind of in-state product range the edge when bids are otherwise equal. Another common scenario is seeing something like a reasonably exceeds or price percentage preference, which allow in-state or other types of local food product bids to be accepted, even if they are at a slightly higher cost. These types of preferences might be, go back, yeah, might be established as standalone laws or paired with procurement target laws, and they're ordinarily going to be needed to be interpreted within the context of more vendor selection legal criteria, such as, again, this best value bid or lowest responsive bid, like those things I discussed earlier. For public sector entities, it's going to be really important to seek guidance from legal counsel to understand how all of these legal requirements will work together. This will ensure procurement teams maximize flexibility in achieving local food procurement goals while staying compliant. So you got to kind of find that mix, right? Next slide. Besides understanding how those types of laws we just discussed or I just discussed might intersect to identify flexibilities and limitations in bid selection criteria, it's also important to recognize that not all purchases require vendor selection through a formal bidding process. For example, some laws allow things like non-competitive flexibilities for orders under certain small purchase thresholds. And many of you on this call are probably already aware of these types of allowances, but you might have some questions about how they are applied, including when there are sort of multiple consecutive purchases from a single vendor over a period of time, maybe within the same, sort of fiscal year. So again, working with counsel to understand how these allowances can be applied ensures that institutions can take advantage of those flexibilities and effectively support local sourcing goals. Next slide. And one more thing I want to highlight in this resource today, although again, there's a lot in there, is this section we've included with guidance on various types of options for creating technical specifications to build into the solicitation requests and evaluation rubrics themselves. So for additional guidance, we've actually included example RFPs and scoring rubrics in the appendix. I'm guessing that a lot of you who are on this call are looking for those types of concrete examples. And so I want to just really encourage you to go all the way down to that index, which is at the bottom of the resource, to find those resources there. Next slide. All right, so that's sort of a high level overview of at least some of the things that you're going to find in that resource. We really hope that it's going to be a useful contribution to the field. Speaking of which, we would really also like to know what other resources may be helpful to you for navigating law and policy issues in the local food procurement space. If you have ideas, you can drop them here in the chat. I think there will also be an opportunity in a follow-up survey that we'll send out after this. If you think of any additional ideas later, but we're definitely interested in learning more about what would be helpful for you. So while you do that, while you add those notes to the chat or think about what you might want to send to us later on, I'm going to sign off by thanking you all for your interest in working on improving public sector procurement, and also turn it back over to Leilani at the Center for Agriculture and Food Systems. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Amanda. And thanks, Brittany. That was great. And yeah, if anybody has any answers to these questions that they want to share, please feel free to put them in the chat. And the questions again were, what type of support or guidance would make implementing local sourcing contracting easier for your team? And what are the challenges you're encountering? I know some of you answered some of that previously when we had the question about what barriers you were facing. So if you have anything else to add, we're always looking to learn more and address those through our own research and creating new resources. And with that, I am going to ask some of the questions that have come in. So we had a few questions that came in, and I'm going to start with one that's for Brittany, if that's okay. Brittany, what was the origin of the main law that created the 20% target? And can you point to the statutory regulation, which I bet the answer is in the appendix of the resource. We probably cite to it there. And I don't know if you know this on the top of your head, but can you define the commissioner in this law?
Sure, yeah. Thanks for that question. And I am going to drop the link to the legislation right there if you want to see what it looks like. Great questions. So the commissioner is the commissioner of the Department of Agriculture. So that's why I sit under that department and I'm working specifically on farm to institution. I think this was initiated by a legislator in Maine named Senator Hickman. He's a farmer and is very much supportive of the local farming community, and I think saw this as a way to make sure that the state-funded institutions, so state funding is going to really support things locally. So I think that was the impetus of the law. So hopefully that answered all the questions.
Great. Thanks, thanks, Brittany. Amanda, you're up next. Could you speak to what an off-contract purchase would look like?
Yeah. So, and I think I saw a question in here earlier that was related to sort of like, what is this off contract clause? What might that look like too? So the idea would be that in some contracts, you might have a limitation that says you have to either buy like all of your source all of your food products through this particular contract, or maybe certain types of food products, like maybe it's all your dairy or all of your produce, depending on sort of what lines are covered. Or there might even be things like minimum purchasing requirements that can also create kind of what ends up leading to sort of near exclusivity. And so in those cases, you might want to say like, well, hey, wait, your particular setup here, what the products that you're allowing us to source through you or that you're sourcing for us don't include quite the full portfolio of what we want to be able to purchase. You might be interested in securing more, like we're talking about here, obviously, locally grown or otherwise locally sourced products. Or maybe it's even getting into other areas, like you want to make sure that you've got some options for, let's say like yogurts that are minimally processed, or other types of foods that you want to have sort of like a limited number of ingredients or reduce certain types of additives. Or maybe you want to make sure that you've got like halal or kosher appropriate foods, or other sorts of considerations. You might want to or have the opportunity to build into the contract this off contract clause, which would allow you to purchase typically a certain percentage of products or maybe certain categories of products off contract. So meaning through other suppliers. Like again, as I was alluding to earlier, and here's kind of the nuance of the caveat. Sometimes you may not want to insert those clauses into a contract where there isn't sort of this exclusivity or near exclusivity that's already set out in the contract terms, because then kind of injecting a clause like that says, hey, we have the right to purchase off contract, creates this kind of, or could create this perception that the contract is intended to be exclusive or near exclusive when it's not. So it's really important to be working with legal counsel to be getting that sort of information up front. So you just really clear, people who are doing the procurement really understand where they can and can not, or where they have to or don't have to work with a particular vendor. And for that, I'm just going to add too, like, I think the easiest way to do this is to send a request to your legal counsel to just ask for a memo outlining sort of what these options are and what your current contract states, and then also to have guidance on what your legal landscape is where you're sitting, so that going forward you can sort of exercise those flexibilities where you've got them, and know where your flexibilities and limitations are.
Great. Thanks, Amanda. I'm going to ask another one. I think it might be best for you to answer because you did the bulk of the research on this. I don't know if you encountered examples of contracts with local producers in federal institutions.
You know, there are going to be examples. We don't have them featured in this particular resource because it is a different animal, so to speak. Working with federal contracts, there's another layer of requirements that will come into play when you're uh, working in that space. And it can be very individualized too, depending on whether you're working with, for example, like uh, school lunch programs or other types of programs, just depending on the individual laws and regulations that are set out for those programs. So yes, there are examples. We have not intentionally focused on them here. We're really focusing on sort of that more local space where you are kind of outside of the federal requirements, though of some of the guidance that we've included, you could extrapolate to apply kind of more generally to the federal context.
Great. This one, I'm going to let you answer, but I can also say a little bit. Somebody asked, are there lawyers that specialize in such contracts? Do you have a referral list building or in development? I know that at CAPS we do not have a referral list building or in development, but we do have a food and ag clinic where our students work on projects with us, and sometimes we work with groups that are doing something that could be like trying to work on a contract. We haven't done that recently. There's also the Harvard Food Law and Policy Clinic that I know, I think they partnered with the city of Boston on the good food purchasing policy there. That's separate from lawyers. That's just like another like resource that I'm aware of. But Amanda, since you work on this and you've been working in this area a little bit more, like how would you answer that question?
I would say maybe yes and no. You will find attorneys that certainly specialize in contract issues and will be able to just sort of apply that general eye to this kind of particular space. You will also find attorneys typically outside of large firms that may be working as solo practitioners or maybe in smaller firms that have more of an eye for kind of the nuances of food systems in general. And you might even find a few that are kind of equipped to handle both the food systems and contracting pieces. I would imagine, yes, there you will find those. Will you find a list anywhere? I haven't seen one myself, but I can, kind of off the top of my head, think of at least a few people that I'm aware of working in this space that have probably have experience that would lend itself. My guess is maybe LinkedIn might be a good resource. Also reaching out to state bar associations, both to if they've got like an egg law section, or even sort of more of like a general business law section where people have contracting experience, they may be able to refer you to specific attorneys who've got experience that's helpful for this particular type of issue.
Awesome. All right, we have time for one more. And Brittany, I don't know if you will be able to answer this or want to, but somebody asked, is the food service management contract specific to an agency type? I'm looking for resources on school food authorities managed by a food service management company and contract language to incorporate local. And I only asked that because somebody asked also about how schools fit into what is going on in Maine. So I don't know if you want to expand on from the Maine perspective where schools fit. Um,
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to that, but again, that's not really my area. The Department of Education focuses on K through 12 schools in Maine. Um, I think that they weren't included in the legislation because the school meals is really a federal program, and then schools themselves are really run at a more local level. So the state has a little bit less impact on kind of the purchasing decisions as well as the federal meal program. But I'll turn it over to somebody else to answer that more fully.
All right, Amanda.
Sorry. You might need to restate the question for me, Lilani, to make
Oh, it's
sure.
okay. We're basically at the end, but this was the last question we're going to get to here, but we'll try to follow up with folks that asked other ones offline. Is the food service management company contract specific to an agency type? Somebody who's looking for resources on school food authorities managed by food service management companies and language to help incorporate local.
Food service management type. Um, I think that, yeah, you will find that there are nuances by type. And I think that digging into this particular resource and then some of the linked resources that we have included in the kind of more resources section will be helpful for teasing some of that out.
Great. Cool. Well, I'm sorry we didn't get to everybody's questions, but I'm so glad people asked questions because that means they were listening and hopefully found something useful in our presentation, which we are just happy about because I know it's a really dense, it can be a dense, dry topic. But thank you for joining and thank you for participating in our polls and sharing your own experience and ideas and answering our questions. So stay tuned for a follow-up survey. That's my main last thing that I'm going to say. Please take it if you can. And if you are interested in being connected with others that are working on this topic, we're going to have a question in our survey that asks whether you would be interested in having your email shared with others that are working on this. And everybody that says yes to that, we'll send a list so that you all can get in touch with each other if you want. But again, thank you. And yeah, thanks to Amanda and Brittany for taking the time to present here and share all of your knowledge and expertise on this. And we hope everybody has a good rest of their week. Thanks so much.
Thanks,
Bye.
Brittany. Thanks, Brittany. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.